Welcome to Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and I'm here with Clay Collins. Clay, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're one of those names that, I should have had you on by now. I just don't know what happened. I mean, your name comes up all over the internet in marketing circles. Your name comes up when I talk to people offline. You're just that guy that people know that he's doing some really cool stuff. I don't know how you haven't been on yet.
Yeah, I think I transitioned from doing a lot of thought leadership marketing to being more heads down and focused on growing the team and creating scalable systems. And it's hard to be the front man. You don't see many CEOs of $100 million plus companies tweeting a lot or whatever.
Yep.
We weren't 100 million plus, but 25 million plus.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that you would recommend that at some point you have to run the company and stop trying to grow your own personal brand if you really want to find success? Do you think that's a good insight?
I think that it really just has to do with what your strengths are. So I figured out that my sweet spot is kind of between 0 and 20 million in annual recurring revenue. And I really enjoy that journey. And somewhere between 15 and 20 million, it's less about growing the business or creating the product. And it's more about creating the business that creates the product. And so you're managing through people. You're not just managing people, you're managing the managers.
Yeah.
And I think the end of that transition is where I kind of I'm no longer operating in my zone of genius. So I think that kind of stuff, being front and center, being at all the conferences, saying yes to every podcast, doing all that stuff, I think it is really good to do at the beginning to get that initial burst of energy.
Okay.
But I don't think marketing takes you long term. I think the biggest kind of growth lever in your business really is your product and providing value at scale. And I think there's a lot of businesses that have really charismatic CEOs that are everywhere, and I know a few of them, and I think it is incidental to their growth when they get pretty large, let's say when they get above 25, 30 million in annual recurring revenue. I think it's incidental that they're everywhere. I don't think that's the reason why they're growing.
Okay.
It's just something they like to do, right? They always did it.
It's
so
their
I do think you
personality.
have to transition and start focusing on systems, and hire people that can take entire parts of the business and just handle them.
Yeah.
And it can't just be the parts that you hate, right? It actually has to be the parts that you're good at, because if your business is dependent upon you at any in any way, then you're not going to be freed up to always have your attention focused on the next big challenge. So
yeah,
I kind of think about, there's working on the business and working in the business. And as a CEO, when you're scaling, you should always be focused on capacity building. And once you've built that capacity, you need to hand it off to someone else.
Yeah.
So, I think it's actually pretty irresponsible for CEOs of large companies to spend too much time on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah. No, it makes absolute sense. You mentioned an interesting phrase. You said zone of genius. Is that something you heard somewhere? Is that your thing? And what is a zone of genius?
Yeah. So I've heard people talk about it in different coaching programs that'll get them to try and focus on their zone of genius. I think Strategic Coach is one of the programs that encourages people to focus on their zone of genius. And I think it's just areas where you not just have maybe 10x leverage, but you have 50x leverage, 100x leverage, things that only you can do. And when you do them, you can kind of move mountains. It was Archimedes said that if he had a
lever long enough.
Exactly. A lever long enough, he can move the world. So I really think it is about focusing on those things and excluding almost everything else.
Yeah. So is your zone of genius the product? Is that why you like that 0 to 20 million? Because that's where you get it. You know how to get the product dialed in, but your zone of genius is not managing the managers. Is that fair enough?
I think my zone of genius is around strategy, which is this term that doesn't really mean anything.
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
It has to do with sort of this combination of timing and combining macro trends that are happening in the space with picking the right business model, which is hard to correct for once you've screwed it up.
Yep.
So business model, pricing, macro trends that are happening in the space, competitive landscape, and then like finding an opening that you can just run through.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are focused on optimization and sort of tweaking every last aspect of their business. But the truth is you don't have to be super productive. You don't have to work 18 hours a day when you've found, sort of a nice point of leverage.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So yeah, so it seems like your zone of genius, it would only be product if we mean product with a capital P. Product meaning business model and trends and timing and all that stuff. Not, does the UI look nice? Like it's got like your like product big picture.
Button color.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's awesome. I mean, you're like built for the startup game. I mean, honestly, like it's the people that have 50x leverage with all the stuff you just said that can play the startup game successfully, right? Like it seems like you're built for it.
Yeah. So I think there's people, there's some CEOs, some founding CEOs that start out and then they go, they kind of go indefinitely. Like, Mark Zuckerberg would be in that category. I think, Steve Jobs probably wouldn't be in that category. I think he had to get his ass kicked a little bit and then come back older and wiser. Yeah. But, there's a handful of people that fit that bill. And then that's probably on one extreme, right? Like dedicating your entire life to one business. And then I think on the other end of the spectrum are people who just are these serial entrepreneurs. They like buying businesses, flipping them. Often they've got multiple businesses running simultaneously, or sort of their span with a business is 1 to 2 years. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle of that. I'm kind of like a 5-year person, and the reason for that isn't that I don't want to necessarily focus on one problem for the rest of my life. It's that at some point, if it's successful, it's going to grow beyond my zone of genius. And I really do feel like the best thing to do when you've reached that point is to fully hand over the reins to someone else. So we have a impressive CEO at Leadpages who's just developed a really incredible team. The CFO came from GoDaddy and was a CFO for one of those businesses. Our VP of product ran QuickBooks Online for Intuit, like ran the whole thing, had full P&L responsibility. Our chief marketing officer has done over $1 billion in sales online. The person who runs HR came from House, which has raised over $100 million. They're a Bay Area startup. So it's a phenomenal team. And I think that when you're a founder, you have a certain level of like moral authority. You've been there for a long time. Plus you have this ambiguous role of like, you're on the board and you founded the company. And it's just best to, once you've made that transition, to just get out of the way, show up at board meetings, be available, help as much as you can, but to step back. And so that's what I've done at Leadpages and Drip, and I think it was the right thing to do. I don't question it at all.
Yeah. Do you think people should feel good about how they do it? So what I mean is, let's say you're the person that has multiple businesses running simultaneously, but that's what you like, and that's your mode, or you're the 5-year guy like you, or you're the the Steve Jobs kind of like. Do you think people, because I always feel like I feel bad that I'm not like the other entrepreneurs. You know what I mean? Like there's a piece of me like, am I doing it wrong? Did I miss that like chapter in the book on how to do this? Or should I feel good that it's the way I'm built? It's fine.
I do. I really think it's just about, it's about doing you and doing you as well as you possibly can. And, there's always someone else with a different constellation of talents and energy levels and proclivities. And
good words.
And so you just got I think you have to trust your instincts there. You got to know yourself, know your DNA. And that's hard, right? Like I think especially in startups, like I think when you're running a fast growth startup, you spend like 3 months doing a good job, and then it takes you like 3 months to figure out that your job is completely changed. And then you guys spend like another 3 months relearning your job, and then you'll have another 3 month stint of like doing a good job, and then you grow, and then everything changes again. So you got to you just repeat the cycle, right? And so for me, it like I repeated that cycle for like 3+ years, and so I was used to, again, doing a good job for 3 months, learning that it changed over the next 3 months, relearning my job, starting all over. So it took me a while to realize that what was happening was just, it was a scale thing. It was sort of a sweet spot. And like, yeah, I mean, there are definitely times when I was like, wow, I wish I could be like entrepreneur X or Y that, that sort of has this sort of full spectrum coverage. But I'm not, and I'm actually like, now that I know that about myself, I'm just a lot happier. I can just double down on where I have the most impact.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, I mean, we didn't really even get in yet to like what you've done. I mean, we just jumped right into like the insights, which is great. Yeah. So, I mean, you're the guy behind Leadpages, one of the co-founders, you were the CEO, now you're, on the board. I mean, I want to dig into Leadpages a little bit because it's been such a success. I think you said, you've done like 25 million a year is what you mentioned a few minutes ago, somewhere around there, right?
So like 50,000 paying customers.
Wow.
Over 25 million a year.
Yeah,
annual recurring revenue.
That's incredible. So like one of my questions, which may not be the right question now, was, what's one of those big growth drivers your time there as CEO, And the reason it may not be the right question now is because what you said about the market and timing and product and finding an angle that you can exploit, is it more about you had the right product for the right market at the right time? Or was it really that you knew something about marketing and growth that was unique? How do you see the growth of that,
Yeah. So, I think every entrepreneur has a pattern. So, I think about Ev Williams. So Ev Williams started Blogger and then had this podcasting thing that eventually turned into Twitter. Then he moved to Medium and started Medium. And every single one of those businesses was about content, right? So that's kind of a repeatable pattern. And it's really obvious with him. I don't think it's always obvious with everyone. I think my pattern is finding spaces that are early, but kind of at this tipping point where, there's this expression, crossing the chasm, and there's a good book called Crossing the Chasm. But, products and companies can cross the chasm, but markets can sometimes cross the chasm. And I like creating like chasm crossing companies or the companies that help the market cross the chasm.
Yeah.
So for example, with Leadpages, when we came out with that, there were some kind of lead generation and landing page platforms at the time, but they were really made for agencies, and they were really meant to be like either on upmarket, they were meant to almost be like Photoshop replacements that rendered web pages. So they were like kind of really complex and took you hours to do. You might as well just learn HTML and CSS in the same amount of time. So that was on one end, and kind of down market, there were just a bunch of WordPress plugins that were written by overseas development teams, and they were kind of run by these marketing gurus that were just looking to monetize their list, or maybe they had a product angle, but they didn't necessarily understand how to run software companies. So what we did was we were like, all right, we're not going to focus on the upper half of the market. We're going to focus on small and medium-sized businesses and solopreneurs, and we're going to come in and we're going to professionalize marketing tech in this space. And so that's what we did. We were like the first product that had full-time in-house, like in our office, US-based, native English-speaking support reps, and software was software as a service. It does run on Google App Engine, and we were, using best practices in the space, and we weren't effing around. We were hardcore, and so I think that was a big piece of it. There definitely was a growth playbook. But we did everything. I think at the end of the day, it really came down to on the product side what we call our T-shirt framework. So that was our product philosophy. So T in T-shirt stands for templatable, right? So you could start out not with a blank slate, but you could start off with a template that had from the very beginning best practices, with regards to conversion marketing. So that's the T. The SH was shareable. You should be able to share this with other people, and this was a vision we had in place, from day one. So it should be template. You should be able to start with a template. It should be shareable. The R stands for revenue measurements. You should be able to measure sort of the revenue generated from this, because whoever posts the revenue gets credit for it, right? Like, if you're not reporting revenue, someone else is going to report revenue, and then they're going to get credit. So you should report revenue. And the last T was testable. You should be able to sort of test these things against each other. So I think we professionalized the space. We came in with this T-shirt framework. And then I think a lot of it from there was we probably like the third leg of this was we decided there was a lot of information. There were a lot of info products being sold on how to grow your business and do various things. And we thought, like, what if we hired or created these courses for free, gave them away? The courses and the information in their courses stood on their own. You wouldn't need our product to make use of the information in these courses, but you could sort of implement the learnings from these courses very quickly, in a very short period of time if you had our product. So we gave we gave away like a $500 or $1,000 course away for free, and then we monetized that with the product, and the course showed you how to use the product if you wanted to. And then we did a lot of webinars. I think people credit probably too much of our early success to webinars. I think a lot there's always this seduction to find like the one thing, so people can just write it off and say like, oh yeah, it's webinars, or oh, it's paid media, or like whatever it is. But it really was sort of those three legs of the stool, and then just like running as hard as we could through every single channel.
No, I mean, it's interesting. I ask a question about growth, and you talk about product, you talk about the framework of the product, you talk about education that helps you use the product. And then you say, oh yeah, and we might have done some webinars and some other things, but none of them alone are to say was the success. It really shows where your head's at. It's about the product. I think that's the way you see the world. It's really about the product, and then a lot of things can work if you don't screw up the product. I think I think there's like this fork in the road when you do your marketing. There's a lot of people, like there are the companies that are the subjects of major PR pieces in magazines, and then there are the companies that advertise in like Taboola or whatever, but they're like advertising around it. And I think that it's really important that you be the company that is providing so much value that you're worth talking about, and you're not you're taking the money that you would have spent on a huge, paid media budget, and you're putting that instead on the product that gets you word of mouth. I think a lot about like net new value. Like, is your product providing net new value? And I think there's a lot of companies that are essentially doing the same thing, but they grow a little bit because people are like, oh yeah, I relate to that person, or oh yeah, their story sounds right to me, or their branding is meant for who I am.
For like women in their early 40s or whatever. And so you end up having all these like verticalized versions of the same product that are created for all these different niches. It's like, well, what if you could just have the whole thing by being smart about it?
Yeah. Well, you've heard the quote where it's like, if you can't do something 10x better, don't do it, right? Is that the idea of net new value? Like, is this fundamentally magnitude better, or is it just another slice of a vertical of the same thing?
Yeah, I think it's like, are you bringing new value above and beyond what the market already has access to?
Yep.
And I think it's really important to do that. I think at the end of the day, down market, where there are like nascent businesses, or, businesses that aren't really making revenue yet or aren't cash flow positive, I think for those businesses, it is about like, do I identify with this guru, or can I relate to this person, or does this make me feel good? You know, and I think it's always good to make people feel good. But I think when you have a real marketing team and a real marketing budget, it doesn't really matter if someone's speaking to you in a way that speaks to your like specific demographic. It matters, like, is this product solving my problem better than any other product? And I think that, in economics, there's a lot of talk about like rational actor theory. Are people rational actors? And when it comes to voting, when it comes to, deciding what to buy, individuals are irrational. They will make decisions based on a whole lot of factors other than, maybe a critical assessment of what's needed. I'll leave politics aside here.
Exactly.
But when it comes to businesses with a growth mandate that are buying software that sort of like live or die based on this thing that they're depending on,
they don't care if it resonates with them. They don't care if the guy on the ad looks like them. Like, it doesn't matter. They're trying to grow the revenue or whatever.
It matters that it doesn't like turn them off. You can't get in your own way, but
you can mess it up, but it's not going to make it.
That's the most important thing. Yeah, like, when you think about companies that exist today, Salesforce, Google, Apple, just Dropbox, Intercom, like
there's net new value.
None of these are like, speaking in these sort of verticalized ways and trying to build cult followings. They're trying to, deliver a solution.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I just, it makes me think that like the old way of like physical goods, it's very much about the brand, because physical goods become commodities so quick that you need a Nike. Yeah, like you need a Nike to speak to a demographic. You need, Crate and Barrel to do that. Where internet companies, it seems like, is more fundamental human needs, net new value, not branding to a vertical. I've never thought about that before, but it's just kind of an idea in my head right now that you've sparked. That's really cool. You said something earlier that I think might be the inside of the interview, which is markets can cross the chasm, right? Yeah. I think a lot of people are familiar with, the book Crossing the Chasm. And when I was thinking about you before this interview, I didn't put it in those words. That's exactly what I thought. I thought Leadpages was something that was a market getting ready to cross the chasm. Nomics with, cryptocurrencies, like it was a joke a year ago. Now it's on the cusp of the chasm, and it might cross it into the mainstream. Like my friends that know nothing about technology and currency are asking me about Bitcoin. That's showing me there's a chasm on the horizon here that might get crossed, depending on, it's like, and I know that we could just say, well, that's your zone of genius and you're able to see those markets. I would actually say this, it's bigger. I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you better get this in your zone of genius, because I think it's like part and parcel of doing this thing well, because so often you see the early players way before the chasm die, and they just teach everyone else what not to do, right? Even though they might have been geniuses, even though they might have been 10 steps ahead of the market, they're actually just educating the real players what to avoid so that you can go and cross the chasm with a big market and get to 25 million in revenue. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think like being too early is the same as being wrong. And there's so many examples of people having the right idea at the wrong time and failing. So like Webvan is an example of that, or Google Glasses, right? Like great idea. But we're just not there yet. And so I do think timing is really important. And I would agree with what you said, that does need to be in your zone of genius. I think there are, if you're going to start from scratch, I think it needs to be in your zone of genius. I think there are really fantastic CEOs where they take businesses that have crossed the chasm and they kind of take them further. So Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn is probably a great example. He came in after Reid Hoffman and Facebook was already around and big, LinkedIn had its start, but they really just needed like kind of a badass to come in and just like run shit completely on point, it like to run that org like Switzerland, man. Like the trains are on time, like everything's just a well-oiled machine. So I think it really just is stage dependent. I think if you're early stage, you have to have that, because by the time markets are really developed, it's hard to be bootstrapped, or it's even hard to be venture backed and make it. Like a lot of these companies now, like where Leadpages and Drip are in the marketing automation space, and clicks for the term marketing automation are like $45, because you've got companies that are willing to spend literally the first 2 years of what a customer would pay for a product to so customer acquisition cost is like the first 2 years of that person being a customer. So they've got a two-year payback just on the customer acquisition cost.
You can't play that game. I mean, they're public, you can't play that game.
You can't. Yeah, right. They haven't posted a profit, like all this stuff. So it becomes really hard to compete, I think, after a while. So I think if you want, I'd say if you want to get big and you don't have like a pile of cash somewhere that rivals your competitors, or even perhaps needs to be bigger because they already have market penetration, then you do need to find these waves and ride them.
And what you just said is most early stage entrepreneurs. I mean, that's why I think it's so important for just people to, if you're not the kind of person that can time markets and when they're going to cross the chasm, consider if you should be a different role or a different place in the life cycle of a business, because I don't know how you can succeed as an early stage entrepreneur, because we just don't have piles of cash.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I think about like in the marketing technology space, there's a really interesting blog called Chief Martech, and they publish this annual infographic that kind of slices up the space. And like every year for the last 4 to 5 years, the number of logos on this kind of map of the MarTech space has been doubling, like doubling. So I think it's hard if you're a SaaS entrepreneur in particular, and you come into a new space and there's already a bunch of established players there, and you're like, well, we're going to build a better product. And it's like, I mean, pick almost any industry, like it doesn't matter. There's usually a lot of people there. So you do need a new angle. You need to have a vision for the future. And I think you need to like double down on that bet, rather than just being like, we're going to be operationally better, like incrementally better with some product and win.
Yeah, it's not enough.
Crushed.
Absolutely. All right, I know we're running out of time. You got a hard stop in a few minutes here. Let's talk about Nomics, right? Your new thing. I know nothing about it. Like, what is Nomics?
Yeah, so there's two parts to Nomics. There's the front end and the back end. So the back end is our API. We're essentially an API service as a company, or API services as a company business. An API is a service company.
There you go.
And so like other companies in that space are like Twilio, SendGrid. Those are the two big ones that come to mind, but there are a lot more, especially when it comes to developer products. So we're selling access to an API, and it's priced on a metered basis. That API is indexing the entire cryptosphere. So we're capturing every trade and every order placed on every single exchange.
Okay.
We're even capturing orders that get placed that aren't filled. So if you put like a limit order or some kind of complex order, and there isn't someone else on the other side of that order, we're indexing all of those. So rather than having to integrate with a whole bunch of exchanges to get this data, you just integrate with our API and you'll get it. And I think the way we're thinking about this is that is analogous to Google. So what's impressive about Google is not their algorithm. You can get, provided that you have a good enough data set, you can get a lot of, data scientists together and come up with a pretty good search algorithm. Mm-hmm. What's most impressive about Google is the fact that they're indexing the entire web multiple times a day. Mm-hmm. Like that is the
breadth of data.
that's really hard to do. So, we're indexing everything right now.
Yeah.
The space is more than 10xing every year. So, 5 years from now, we might be the only ones with all this data.
Yeah.
We're adding to that transaction analytics and analytics, for individual blockchains. And so we're going to combine that. And so what's going to consume that API is the second part of our business, which is the consumer site, which aims to be like the Yahoo Finance or the Google Finance of
so you're going to punch in how you want to slice the data and get back visualizations, get back, the piece of the graph that you needed.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're kind of our own customer. So the front-end website is
a version of what you can do with the API.
is just going to be one of several customers for the API, and we're going to sell the API to like hedge funds, family offices,
absolutely,
institutional investors, people who make apps.
So is it gonna cost a lot to get access to this API, or are you gonna go and where's your price point on this thing?
Yeah, so it's not fixed. I really like the business model of like Amazon Web Services.
How much
Twilio,
you use?
SendGrid.
Yeah.
It's almost free if you're an engineer and you're just making a version of the app for you. But once you've deployed that into production and people are using it at scale, Stripe is another example of this kind of company. Once you're using it at scale, then it costs you real money. So when we were building Leadpages on Google App Engine, it was essentially free, and then later it's tens of thousands of dollars a month, right? So it ended up being a big contract for them. So that's the way we like to price. And I guess I saw the benefits of that when Leadpages acquired Drip, or Aqua partnered with Drip. One of the cool things about the Drip business model is there is no ceiling on the amount someone can pay us. So like with Leadpages, there were 3 tiers, and there was an enterprise tier, but there was a ceiling on how much people can pay us. With Drip, if someone has 2 billion contacts, they're going to pay us more than someone with 1 billion contacts, right? There really is no ceiling other than our ability to scale the platform.
Yeah, Nomics sounds incredible, because I'm just thinking about, like, right now, all we have is, what is the price of this cryptocurrency today? That's usually the insight most people have, like, oh, it crossed 10K, let's talk about that. But they don't know about the unfulfilled orders. They don't see the things that are asymmetrical below the surface that can give you future indications of what might happen. You don't see the individual players that should hold sway and influence what you do and what their moves are. When we have that kind of granularity with the market as a whole, like, we're mature enough that we see that more. We know when Warren Buffett makes a move. With cryptocurrencies, it's kind of hidden. So, I mean, I just absolutely love the idea of what Nomics is, and I love the idea of what developers are going to do with it. I mean, there's going to be tools that do incredible things using this API, and people will never know they're using your API. They'll know the brand name of that tool, and they're going to pay a lot of money for that tool, and you're going to be behind the scenes supplying all the data the whole time. It's pretty awesome. I mean, it shows what timing the market looks like, because it's not there yet, right? Like, this doesn't make sense today, but it will make complete sense.
The API part does.
The API, totally. But it will, like, it's getting there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things, I think, that are behind the scenes that we want to bring forward. For example, the economic policies behind a lot of these tokens. So, with Bitcoin, people tend to know a lot, but even with, some of these other top 10 currencies that are now in the, multiple billions of dollars in market cap, some of them only have like 20% of the tokens mined. So you have 80% left in terms of inflation. That's really important for an investor to know, right? That what they have is going to be diluted significantly in the next 8 years. But people don't really know that kind of stuff. I mean, smart investors do, but to make this available programmatically, I think is going to be interesting. So there's a lot of things like that we want to provide. I also really like the idea of being this behind the scenes utility company. We don't really care if mobile's the next thing, or search on Alexa, or everything goes voice, or if it's like some version of computing in your car. We're going to be behind all of that in the back end, powering it. And so I kind of think about Amazon Web Services as a tax on the internet, right? Like whatever happens, like they're getting a cut of the internet's growth. And I think that's an interesting way to build the business, is kind of with these good old boring utility companies that power things.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard it said so often that the boring stuff is what should get us excited. If there's too much sizzle, you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
There's something to that. That boring stuff sometimes just tried and true.
Yeah, I think the back end tends to be that way.
It
It
is.
depends on where you are in the application stack.
Most people
but
are
we're
not in the back end. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In the back end.
Yeah, the back end is where the select few are. All right, so we're gonna wrap this up. I got two final questions here for you that I ask everybody, and they can be short answers. But one, what's the best advice you have for anyone trying to grow a startup? And it may be something you already said. What advice do you have for that person?
I this is a little, I'd say meditate every day. Sit down for 15 minutes, set a timer. Don't read any fancy books. Just set a timer, sit your ass down. Don't have your phone near you, and meditate every day. I really think that's the best thing you can do.
Awesome. And second question, what are you doing right after this interview is over, no matter how boring it is?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm preparing to launch our podcast for cryptocurrency investors.
That's not boring at all. It actually sounds awesome. So, all right, good stuff. Clay, it is a privilege to have you on this show. Your insights are nonstop from the time we started until now. That is unique. I hope to have you back someday. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.